Why wrestling dominates Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Okay? Now, I am going to say this. I'm not going to tolerate denial on my channel. So I'm not going to go back and forth on this channel for 6 months with people who are trying to justify spending $200 a month learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I think the evidence is clear that wrestling is the foundation of mixed martial arts. When it comes to cage fighting, it is without a doubt the superior and has been proven to be far and above the superior Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. If we look at 20 of the all-time greatest MMA fighters, if we look at 20 of the all-time greatest MMA fighters, at least 18 are wrestlers. At least 18 of 20 all-time greatest. I mean the greatest. I don't mean great. I don't mean Hall of Famers. I mean, if you name from 1 to 20 the greatest wrestlers of cage fighting, of UFC, the greatest wrestlers in the history of the UFC. Let's look at the UFC. 18 of the 20. Now, I have a soft spot for Anderson Silva. So you would have to put Anderson Silva in there, top 10. Okay? And Fedor in there, top 10. And I'm going to be fair. Although Fedor could wrestle, and Sambo has a great deal of wrestling, I'm going to just call it Sambo, and I'm not going to claim him as a wrestler. Okay? But if we look at the top 20, at least 18 are wrestlers. Let's look at the top 5. Top 5 all-time greatest MMA fighters. Top 5. Cheating as he has done, you can't deny that John Jones is in there in the top 5. Wrestler. Demetrius Johnson has to be in there in the top 5. Wrestler. Okay? George St. Pierre has to be in there in the top 5. Wrestler. Okay? Now that's 3. Khabib, you're going to probably put in there, right? That's 4 out of 5. 4 out of 5. Wrestling is so dominant that if you, no matter who you put in that 5th slot, no matter who you put in that 5th slot, if it's not Anderson Silva, it's going to be a wrestler. The consensus, greatest of all time. The consensus, George St. Pierre, John Jones, Khabib, Demetrius Johnson. 4 out of 5. Now you can put Anderson Silva in there, I won't have an issue. But if you put anybody else in there, they're going to be a wrestler. Unless it's Fedor. It's going to be a wrestler. Daniel Cormier, you're going to put him in there? He's a wrestler. Kamaru Usman, you're going to put him in there? He's a wrestler. Henry Cejudo, you're going to put him in there? He's a wrestler. Dominic Cruz, you're going to put him in there? He's a wrestler. Okay? Now I'm not finished. I'm not finished. I'll tell you why wrestling dominates Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I'm not finished. I asked my nephew, who's 15 years old, just off the top of his head, to give me some wrestlers, some UFC wrestlers. My nephew, 15 years old, right? Wrestlers high school, 15 years old. I said, just off the top of your head, and I'll write them down. These are names he gave me. George St. Pierre, Demetrius Johnson, John Jones, Khabib, Daniel Cormier, Kamaru Usman, Matt Hughes, Henry Cejudo, Dominic Cruz, T.J. Dillashaw, Cain Velasquez, Randy Couture, Charles Sonnen. He named some people I won't even throw in the mix because they really didn't wrestle a whole lot. They didn't grapple a whole lot in their careers. Or when they were fighting, they chose to strike, right? But the greatest, perhaps the greatest high school wrestler of all time, right? Big Rig, Johnny Hendricks. Perhaps the greatest high school wrestler of all time was Johnny Hendricks, right? Wrestler. Another great NCAA wrestler, Josh Koscheck. I mean, I didn't even mention Mark Coleman, Mark Kerr. I didn't even mention all these people. That's how dominant wrestling is over Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu when it comes down to cage fighting. Okay? Now, There are some people who will say, I got a comment, and the gentleman said, well, you know what? You will have to have some kind of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu if it was a grappling contest. Okay, listen, I'm not talking about sliding around on your butt. But I also want people to understand this. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is not the only art that has submissions. It's just that catch wrestling hasn't caught on as much as it should. Catch wrestling has submissions also. Okay, so it's not that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the only art that has submissions. So you really don't need Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu even in a grappling match. You can use catch wrestling and probably come out even better because it meshes well with Greco-Roman. It meshes well even better with folk-style wrestling. Okay, so you don't need Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu even in a grappling contest. But there are people who have said, well, you know, you might need a little Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in a grappling contest. I'm talking about the cage here. And in the cage, wrestling is king. No question. Why does wrestling dominate Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Here we go. Number one, let me calm down here. Wrestling is objective based. It is objective based. What does that mean? In wrestling, you are given a template, okay? But the object is still more important, or the objective is still more important than the means. Okay, the end justifies the means, whereas Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is technique-driven. You must do it a certain way. And if you don't do it a certain way, you're not considered a good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, right? There are people who will bash you if you don't follow that perfect technique. Wrestling is objective-driven. It's driven by the objective. And this is why when a wrestler goes up against a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, the wrestler wins. Because the wrestler is coming from the perspective of objective. The Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner is coming from the perspective of technique. And doing something properly is always in the back of the mind of the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner. Number two, wrestling, like boxing, has a major thing to its advantage, and that is it has very few techniques, but it has fewer techniques than most martial arts, but its strength is that it strings together the techniques that it has. Let's look at boxing. Boxing has what? 6 punches, maybe 8 punches, right? Every other punch is a hybrid version of those six or 8 punches. That's it. That's all boxing has. Now, Terence Crawford knows the same 6 punches. Let's just say 6. Terence Crawford knows the same 6 punches as someone who has been in a boxing gym for 6 months. But would you allow that person who has been boxing for 6 months to spar all out with Terence Crawford? You wouldn't. Why? Because although Terence knows every punch that the kid knows, or the guy knows who's been boxing for 6 months, the development of Crawford's offense is simply too much for that person to withstand if he spars with Crawford without if he spars with him all out. It's not the amount of skills, it's not the amount of techniques, it's the development of those techniques. Compared to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right, depending on what lineage you're training in, there can be 300 techniques. Some say Gracie Jiu-Jitsu has 600 techniques. Whatever, I will tell you that wrestling, folk style, Greco-Roman, freestyle, they have maybe 10%, maybe 10% of the techniques of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But it's developed in such a way that chaining together attacks in wrestling becomes second nature. That's what it shares with boxing. If you look at boxing, what is boxing combinations? They're attacks. The jab is the first attack. And with 1, 2, 3, the jab is the first attack. The cross is a second attack. And the hook is a third attack. It's really, a combination is a string of attacks. But look how developed those attacks are with Canelo Alvarez. Look how developed those strings of attacks are with Tank Davis. Look how developed those strings of attacks are with Terence Crawford. Wrestling has that to its advantage. Number 3. There are only 3 martial arts that, in my opinion, have a mindset that is distinctive to them. Okay? That is that is the norm for them. Traditional karate is a mindset. Traditional karate done well, traditional, not sport, traditional karate done well is a mindset. Muay Thai, real Muay Thai, right? You can even say Dutch kickboxing, right? But Muay Thai has a mindset. Wrestling is the third martial art that has to its advantage a mindset. If it is passive, it is not karate. If it's passive, it's not Muay Thai. If it's passive, it's not wrestling. Look at the degree of passivity that you see black belts, advanced black belts, so-called advanced and great black belts, the kind of passivity that you see them training, the kind of passivity in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu top-notch tournaments. That kind of passivity loses all the time to wrestling because of the mindset. To wrestle is to impose your will on the person in front of you. Okay, that is not necessarily an objective of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Okay. Number 4 reason why wrestling dominates Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Cardio. Now that's not to say other martial artists don't have cardio, but there is no martial art that builds your cardio, demands that you have cardio, and depends as much on cardio as wrestling. You need even to practice high school wrestling, not even wrestle in a match, but to just survive the practice. You need cardio like no other martial art. Okay? Number 5, paranoia. Paranoia. You will never convince a wrestler that they are winning if they are on their back. Okay? Wrestlers are paranoid, and they fight paranoid. They grapple paranoid. If you're not on top, you're not winning. That's the 5th reason. A natural paranoia that you take on as a wrestler. Mediocre wrestlers, average wrestlers have this paranoia in their DNA. That paranoia helps them put the ground and pound. I want to finish up this video by making that clear. Ground and pound is not BJJ and strikes. Ground and pound is wrestling and strikes. Wrestling and strikes is ground and pound. Mr. Ground and Pound himself, Mark Coleman.
Finally doubles up on the right. Oh, he doesn't want to turn his back. That's going to be from sliding. Once you create distance, then you have opportunity.
There's a right hand, another right hand by Carney. Doubles up on the right.
Oh, he doesn't want to turn it back. That's going to be it.
Smashing machine. The smashing machine himself, Mark Kerr. Kevin Randleman.
Every song.
Wrestling and striking is ground and pound. So, the 5 reasons again why wrestling dominates Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Number 1, wrestling is objective based. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is overly concerned. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighters are hampered. They are hampered by the preoccupation with doing something properly. Number 2, wrestling has few techniques. Few techniques. You can say maybe 10% of the techniques of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But because of that, there is time spent on the development and the chaining and the connection of your attacks. Number 3, wrestling has a distinctive mindset. And that distinctive mindset is one of dominance. Number 4, there is no cardio like a wrestler's cardio. Right from the very beginning. From the very beginning on that mat, you are developing your cardio. Number 5, paranoia. Wrestlers are paranoid. They are paranoid. They want to remain on top all the time until the match is over. You will never convince a wrestler they are winning if they are on their back. A wrestler knows that if you are not on top, you are losing. And that paranoia will always make them scramble to remain on top. So those are the 5 reasons, put together rather quickly, as to why wrestling dominates Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.